The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the program. There are conflicting reports about the Kenya mall attack. On the one hand, some officials have declared that all hostages being held by the Al-Shabaab militants at the Westgate Shopping Center in Nairobi, Kenya, are now free. The quote on the Twitter account of the government's Disaster Operations Center late last night said, "We believe all hostages have been released. Situation of hostiles to be confirmed." There are conflicting reports. Others say that hostage takers are continuing to hold out at the mall. The backstory on this, Lewis, is that more than 60 people have been killed in this assault on an upscale mall, which lasted, really at this point is going into 4 days. The foreign minister, Amina Mohammed, said in an interview with PBS's NewsHour that the Americans were, that two of the individuals involved were Americans, 18 to 19 years old, of Somali or Arab origin, and, quote, lived in Minnesota at one time, Minnesota and one other place at some point. There is also a British attacker who is said to be a woman who has, quote, done this many times before. Those details, Lewis, are also being met with some resistance. Some saying that living or more appropriately residing in Minneapolis does not necessarily make someone an American. I happen to think, Lewis, that the focus that has developed over the last 12 to 18 hours about whether or not these individuals are, by the letter of the law, American is by and large irrelevant.
Right. I'm trying to figure out how that would change the story. I mean, I guess what people are trying to look for is evidence that, well, look, if these were Americans, this could happen here. And, you know, it is just part of that whole thing where other people are just making most of the citizens terrified.
Yeah, and the reality is we know that this could happen here in the United States, and we also know that it doesn't really matter whether you are American or not, that we have a whole host of domestic right-wing terrorism. We, of course, we've had, in the U.S., we've dealt with extremist Muslim terrorism. Other countries have dealt both with American and other terrorism, and it doesn't really tell us anything new. It seems to be one of these sidebars that leads to, it's a similar discussion to me to that of when in the U.S. there is some kind of a violent incident and figuring out, we have conservatives saying, oh, the guy was a liberal. And then we have liberals saying, well, he was like a constitutional conservative. And ultimately, while there may be political influences for many of these things, extremism in any form can lead to violence. And I don't know that, to me, the more interesting focus, the more valuable focus here is we have a group here, these Al-Shabaab militants. We have a group here that was by and large considered to be very weak for to not say that they had been destroyed because they really hadn't been, but to say that they were very weak seems very accurate. And what we're learning is that even when you significantly weaken extremist groups, you can actually lead them to be even more desperate and then perpetrate attacks like this, which is a completely unhinged taking hostages in a mall. That really seems to be where the focus should be.
Right. I mean, I don't think it really matters how small any of these groups are. If you've got a 5-person group, well, 5 people with a bunch of assault rifles and explosives can do quite a bit of damage.
One of the stories that has come out of this is being reported on Raw Story and elsewhere, and it tells the story of a 4-year-old British boy who was caught up in this entire thing and went up to one of the militants and told him, this is according to the boy's uncle, "You're a very bad man," according to what the uncle told the son. The attacker then is reported to have taken pity on the family and then handed some of these kids a Mars bar and said, "Please forgive me, we are not monsters." The kids were later pictured outside the mall clutching that chocolate bar as a dead body lay behind them. So no surprise, Lewis, that it's been an incredibly gruesome scene. Even now, as we are recording and broadcasting our program, conflicting reports. But I think the most important thing that can be done in the wake of this is don't fall into the kind of pointless but more common conversations that start around these issues, but let's focus on the groups, let's focus on the causes, and let's actually step back and take a look at what is happening globally with violence.
Right. But you know what? That can be really hard to do. I
Yeah.
mean, and then when you get into that, of course, we're talking about the war on terror, which brings up all sorts of other conversations.
Before telling you about this next story, I actually want to play a voicemail that came in over the weekend that I believe implied we weren't going to talk about this story. Take a listen to this voicemail.
Hey, what's up, David? I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the Christian church attack in Pakistan that killed 78 people. You being a Muslim, or I guess a Muslim apologist, I should say. I was just curious what your opinion on that was.
Yeah. So listen, we're not Muslim apologists on this program. What we are on this program is individuals, Lewis, correct me if I'm wrong, who believe that extremism in all forms is dangerous, religious extremism in all forms is dangerous, in the context of attacks in the U.S., right? This is an American-based program that focuses mostly on American news. The majority of American so-called terrorist attacks are perpetrated by Americans who typically are of some form of the Christian religion, whether it be and it could be any, right? And maybe they grew up in that situation, but they don't particularly identify as religious. That's just what we're dealing with. So we don't avoid talking about when Muslims attack others. And this is a story that I want to report about, Lewis. As the New York Times reports, there was a suicide attack on a historic church in northwestern Pakistan. At least 78 people were killed. This was one of the deadliest attacks on what is a Christian minority in Pakistan in many, many years. This occurred as worshipers were leaving All Saints Church in the old quarter of the regional capital Peshawar. After a service on Sunday morning, there were about 600 people who had attended. They were leaving to receive free food that was being distributed on the lawn when two explosions went off, and at least 78 people were killed, including 34 women and 7 children. This actually coincided with a broader wave of attacks on religious minorities that include Shiite Muslims. So this is a problem. This is an absolutely despicable attack. We have more than one minority in Pakistan, Lewis, that is being that is in the target, so to speak, in the crosshairs of the majority Muslim population there. And in the same way that here in the U.S. you have infighting even among Christian groups in many cases. Are they conservative enough? Are they not? Why do we have some pro-life Catholics, or rather some pro-choice Catholics? Well, there's some Christian groups that don't like that. This is those types of infighting incidents spreading beyond just the Muslim sects into now a Christian church. It's despicable, and there's absolutely no reason to hide this. There is extremism in all religions.
Of course, you've got it. And you know what? Wherever there is a religious minority, there is persecution against that religious minority. And, with regard to that voicemail, I think it kind of suggested that that this is a Muslim thing strictly. But
well, sure, that was the back. So there was like the layer one implication of the voicemail, which is we only talk about bad things Christians do. We don't talk about bad things Jews or Muslims do. Factually untrue. But then layer two, of course, is the implication that it is actually predominantly Muslims who are carrying out violence based on religion, which of course is factually untrue, as we have reported on this program countless times over the last who knows how many years.
Yeah, that's it. Clearly, that's not normally the type of voicemail we would play, right?
No, I mean, it served the purpose because since we had that story on our list and that voicemail came in, it helps to illustrate the perception that exists among many about many progressive shows that exist in the United States. DissidentVoice.org is reporting that a half ounce of marijuana has landed a Louisiana man in prison for 20 years. He was sentenced in the New Orleans criminal court for possessing 15 grams, or just over half an ounce of marijuana. We're talking about 27-year-old Corey Ladd, who does have prior drug convictions. He was sentenced a few days ago as a multiple offender to 20 years hard labor at the Department of Corrections. Marijuana use, although it has been decriminalized and even legalized for some, I guess we would call them personal use, minor amounts, small amounts, in some parts of the country, in many parts of the country, it can still land you in jail, in prison for decades. Nationwide, the latest numbers from the FBI report that 762,000 arrests per year for marijuana. This is about half of all drug arrests. Even though blacks and whites use marijuana at similar rates, black people are 3.73 times more likely to be arrested for possession of marijuana than are white people. So, Lewis, we have to contextualize these drug war stories and stories about the resistance to legalize and decriminalize marijuana, even in the face of cigarettes and alcohol being legal and taxed. Remember, the drug war was initially in part created to discriminate against minorities. It was pushback to minorities starting to have equal legal standing to white people. And it has had what has turned out to be kind of like a pleasant side effect for many, which is it funds private prisons and the corporations that own them. It funds the DEA. It allows further distraction from the broader income inequality that exists in this country, right? The drug war serves a lot of purposes, but it is disproportionately used along racial lines to put minorities in prison at far greater rates, assuming the same level of drug usage or possession as white people. And we're seeing it in black and white happening in Louisiana.
Of course, there are plenty of places where marijuana is still illegal that prosecutors might let this slide, might give a very minimal sentence because they understand what's going on here. But we still, unfortunately, have a legal system that's full of prosecutors who are of the mentality that this is evil stuff or that are just straight up racist.
Yeah, and not only that, Lewis, that everybody can hide behind, hey, mandatory minimums. These are statutes that we're just checking the boxes, right? There's previous convictions here involving drugs. It has nothing to do, I'm just the cog in the wheel. I don't need to worry about the fact that the origins of much of this drug war are racist and xenophobic at their base. I'm just the cog in the wheel, Lewis. Mandatory minimums. I do what I need to do.
Yeah, of course. You're right. Very easy to hide behind that.
All right, let's take a break. I want to break early because I have so much, Lewis, to talk about regarding Obamacare. There's been a blow up over the last 3 days regarding many aspects of Obamacare. There's new ads. There's Jesus. There's Sarah Palin. There's so much stuff. So we'll take a break. Of course, you should be signing up for David Pakman Show membership so that you get the bonus show. davidpakman.com/membership. Let's take a break. Obamacare explosion implosion is coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
Support the David Pakman Show for free by doing all of your Amazon.com shopping through the banner on our website. Go to davidpakman.com, scroll down the right side of the page. You'll see a link to Amazon. Click it, do your shopping. That's it. You can also become a David Pakman Show member, made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Some statistics do suggest that the economy is improving despite having a Democratic president, but those statistics obviously have a liberal bias. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Michael Marino. Michael, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You are supporting this program. You are keeping us on the air. Join Michael as a member at davidpakman.com/membership. I've outlined, Lewis, these two paths that are running concurrently with regard to opposition to Obamacare, also known as the Affordable Care Act. Path one is to try to defund Obamacare. So yes, the bill passed. It became law. Yes, it's been appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court and upheld as constitutional. Let's try to defund it. That's one avenue. Avenue number two is just trying to convince people not to participate in Obamacare, whatever it is that means. We're going to talk about both of those avenues. First, though, the defunding side. The Republican Party is completely imploding on the defund Obamacare thing. Friday, Republicans passed this stopgap funding bill that would keep government open, but at the same time not fund Obamacare, essentially terminating it. The vote went 230 to 189, completely along party lines, as expected. And Ted Cruz and Jim DeMint, even though they are pushing for this defunding of Obamacare, according to Wall Street Journal editor Paul Gigot, have admitted, listen, we're actually not going to succeed at defunding Obamacare, essentially confirming what we all know, Lewis, that these are all moves for political posturing to be able to go back to their constituents and say, I voted to defund Obamacare. I presented any number of bills, to use that phrase that we like to use so much. Any number of bills have been presented to defund Obamacare. And Paul Gigot saying, I've talked to these people privately. Even Ted Cruz and Jim DeMint and these guys, they say, well, we're not going to be able to defund Obamacare. I don't know if this should make me happy that they're not that stupid that they really think they can defund it, or sad that knowing they can't defund it, they're continuing to waste taxpayer time and money.
Well, that's all these guys do, is waste taxpayer time and money, and none of them really represent or do what is going to help their constituents. And we've talked about how this might backfire if in a couple of years people realize that Obamacare was a good thing. They're saving money, they're healthier, and it worked. Then this could potentially backfire on them if it was strictly political moves.
You're exactly right, which is, as I've said before, the window of time is small where you could even conceivably get public support to do this, because once Obamacare fully comes into practice and it is fully implemented, it's going to be much more difficult to get it repealed, because people will say, why are you trying to defund it? Or not repeal, but defund. We like it. It's working. It's at least helping bring down prices to some extent. There's a new set of ads looking at path number 2, the anti-Obamacare path number 2, which is convince people not to have health care. There's a new anti-Obamacare ad. There's actually a set of ads which depict these creepy gynecological exams and prostate exams. Think Progress is reporting about this. And this is a campaign by Generation Opportunity, which is a conservative group that is tied to Charles and David Koch. Probably shouldn't be surprised about that at all. And they're spending about $750,000 on a campaign specifically targeted at convincing young people they don't need health insurance and not to get it. This, we've talked about what the impetus is for this. The entire Obamacare reduction of prices by not allowing health insurers to not cover those with pre-existing conditions, who presumably will represent a higher average cost in terms of payouts, is by also having young people who on the average will require less health care as part of the insurance pool. That's kind of the premise. So the idea, Lewis, is, hey, if we keep those young people who don't need much care out of the insurance market, the entire system will fall apart. Take a look at this ad.
Oh, I see you chose to sign up for Obamacare.
Yeah, it's actually my first time here.
Well, here we are then. Change it to a gown, and the doctor will see you soon.
Okay, well, your vitals look good. Any changes in your diet or exercise? All right, can you swing on over, scoot on down, and try to make yourself comfortable? Okay, let's have a look.
First of all, Lewis, Obamacare does not actually mandate any specific changes in the way that doctors conduct sexual health exams. There's also another similar ad where there's a guy who's like about to receive a prostate exam. He takes off his pants and Uncle Sam appears behind him. Okay, so you kind of get the gist of what these ads are. But there is a huge double standard with this. And the double standard is that it is actually Republican policies that threaten to subject female patients to specific state-mandated invasive procedures like these transvaginal ultrasounds. It's so funny because the ad is deceptive at its face. But if we want to talk about who really wants to mandate invasive gynecological exams, it's Republicans. It's conservative, evangelical, right-wing religious Republicans.
I know. It's incredible. On every level, this ad is just shocking. It's shocking that they would just assume that the people watching it will just be repulsed and just immediately be on their side. But you know what? It probably works with a lot of people, to be honest.
I am going to push back. I don't think so. I think that most young people, an overwhelming majority of young people, are not going to fall for this idiocy because it just does not make any sense. I mean, of course, literally it doesn't make sense that Uncle Sam is going to pop out of a woman's vagina. But putting that aside for a second, I think most young people know that this isn't the case. I know you can find examples of people who fall for it, but most don't.
Right. Well, I mean, with young people, I think a lot of the time it might be their parents who fall for it. I also think it's hilarious that here's this young woman who's probably between the ages of 18 to 21, 22, and says it's her first time at getting a gynecological exam. I mean, I'm not sure that's a common occurrence.
That's an interesting point. The entire scenario seems unlikely. If it really were her first gynecological exam, she'd be much younger and she would probably be there with a parent. At the same time, if you're you're actually making a good point. I didn't think of the logistics of the ad, which presumably make no sense either. What kind of healthcare were you getting before if that's your first gynecological exam? Very good point, Lewis. Also along the lines of the Affordable Care Act, Sarah Palin is now on this anti-Republican rampage. She is upset that some Republicans are saying, listen, Ted Cruz with his whole defund Obamacare thing, it's not going anywhere. Sarah Palin feels that Republicans should be standing behind Ted Cruz regardless of the lack of connection with reality that is involved in what he wants to do. This is what she had to say on Fox News.
We ask as an American people collectively that they not wave a white flag and just capitulate and give in to the liberals and to those who want this socialized program of health care coverage in our nation. We don't want that. We know it's unaffordable. It's not going to work for America. And as more of us dig into what actually Obamacare encompasses, more of us say, no, enough is enough. Let's undo this and implement something that's patient-centered and
all right, so first of all, I really don't think that Sarah Palin knows what socialism is. I think, Lewis, if you asked her to explain socialism, she would be able to give you 10, 12, maybe 15 seconds of talking points that she would clearly not completely grasp and understand. But I don't think she really understands what socialism is. And as we know, what is socialist about mandating that 30 million additional people sign up to pay health insurance premiums to a for-profit health insurance company? But putting that aside, the word salad from Sarah Palin, how can you even follow what the woman is saying?
I don't know. And of course, I do know why she gets mad at people who come to the realization that something they're doing is not realistic. I mean, that's pretty much her whole career.
Yeah, no. Was it realistic to think she could be the vice president of the United States? Lack of realism, I think. Was it realistic to think she wouldn't quit being governor of Alaska in the middle of her term? It seems that lack of connection to reality has really been the theme of Sarah Palin's historied career at this point.
Right. It's, but you know what? I'm glad it happened, and I'm glad we're still watching this train wreck.
Yeah. A Republican is saying that senators will eventually find Jesus and defund Obamacare. Good write-up about this on progressivepopulist.org. The video is from CNN. This is a Tea Party-backed Republican congressman from Ohio. His name is Jim Jordan. He was on CNN talking about defunding Obamacare and talking about, Jesus and stuff like that. And here's what he had to say.
Well, I would just point out, Jake, there were a lot of Republicans just 2 weeks ago who said we were going to go to war with Syria, and today we're not. So look, when the American people get engaged, they have a way of making elected officials see the light, find the Lord, and do the right thing. This bill's the right thing.
I really like this. Not only does he think that all of a sudden Jesus is just going to light the way for Democratic senators to defund Obamacare, I'm just not fully understanding how, why would Jesus, where exactly, what teachings, I'm not an expert on Jesus, Lewis, you know that I admit this, but is the Jesus side of healthcare that we should not have a system which makes healthcare more affordable for more people, but rather should have a system that, based on the amount of money the family you happen to be born into has and the economic and social and cultural opportunities that you have growing up, you just might not be able to access care, and it should be the right of for-profit insurers to deny you that care. That's Jesus. That's the teaching of Jesus. I don't remember that part.
I'm pretty sure Jesus would want everyone to have health care. I'm pretty sure Jesus would be behind single payer health care, a national plan that covers everybody. But, I guess I'm not a biblical scholar.
No, neither one of us is a biblical scholar, but I really don't think that the situation that would be the status quo that Republicans like Jim Jordan want to push is the one Jesus would be signing up for.
I think something else here is that Jesus doesn't really get sick, so he doesn't want to have to be forced to pay for health care. He doesn't want it, and he doesn't want to get taxed that whatever that small taxes if you don't have health care.
Yeah, listen to the amount. Let's explore that, Lewis. In Jesus, we're talking about a man that you can't even kill, okay? You can kill him, you can do things to him that would kill normal people, and he comes back to life. He doesn't need health care, and his position would still be one that we have to provide health care to everyone. It's amazing that the message of Jesus is being perverted by individuals like Republican Representative Jim Jordan. Amazing. So there it is. Total Republican implosion on the Affordable Care Act. It will not be defunded. We are only 6 or 7 days away at this point, Lewis, from when people can begin to enroll in the exchanges that will take effect on January 1st. Let's see. Let's see what happens. We're giving it a chance. Let's see if what Republicans have been predicting for years takes place, or let's see if it improves the healthcare situation a little bit. Let's take a break. Facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Join us on Facebook. We'll be back after this. I got one of the most compelling letters I've ever received from a viewer of the David Pakman Show. I'm going to read it to you after the break, and then we will discuss.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
A Sikh professor in New York City has been mistaken for a Muslim and attacked by a group of teens. Raw Story is reporting this. This is Prajat Singh, an assistant professor of international and public affairs at Columbia, who recently wrote a New York Times op-ed about hate crimes. He was attacked by a group of teens who were, of course, shouting anti-Muslim sentiments over the weekend. Singh, who, as I mentioned, is a Sikh and not Muslim, told NBC4 that I heard "Get Osama" and then terrorists. And the next thing I felt was someone moving past me, ripping at my beard and hitting me in the chin. He tried to escape his attackers. They were able to surround him and they forced him to the ground. They were kicking him. They were punching him. He was taken to Mount Sinai Hospital where he had surgery on his fractured jaw. I think that we've talked before, Lewis, about how Sikhs have suffered significant discrimination in the U.S. being mistaken for Muslims. This is not the first time that that's happened. It probably will not be the last, sadly. But I want to read to you an interesting comment from Amardeep Singh, no relation to the victim of the beating here, who is a professor of English at Lehigh University. And he said that the problem with most reporting on the stories of Sikhs being beaten up because they were mistaken for Muslims is that they often implicitly take the position that the attack would have been justified had the guy actually been a Muslim. And he says, as always, with incidents of Muslim bashing and Sikh bashing, it seems important not to dwell on the fact that Sikhs are not Muslims. For one thing, the attackers may not care that much one way or another. But more importantly, one doesn't want to sanction hateful speech or violence against any vulnerable group based on correct identification. Remember Colin Powell. At the time when Colin Powell first started to be more of a vocal supporter of President Obama's, which coincided with, I guess we could call it the height of the birther movement, Colin Powell said, putting aside whether anyone thinks President Obama is a Muslim or whether he is or isn't, because he clearly is not, why would it matter? Why would it matter? And Colin Powell did a great job of bringing that point of view kind of into the mainstream. This is true. These individuals are, as a factual matter, these teens and others who beat up Sikhs, they're not even informed about who they hate, right? They barely know anything about the groups that they hate. But we can't forget that it would be unacceptable either way.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is part of the reason why education is one of the most important things in the world. I mean, you know what? It's not to say that they wouldn't still go beat up a Muslim if they knew for certain that it was a Muslim. But at least being aware of the world that you live in could help to alleviate some tension.
In response to the piece we did on a recent show about yet another of these religious right-wingers saying people choose to be gay, I got a letter from an anonymous David Pakman Show viewer. I mean, I know who he is, but I'm keeping his identity private, who said, I am gay, and I chose to be gay. I've never gotten a letter like this before, Lewis. I'm going to read it to you. David, I'm a 60-year-old gay man, out since my mid-20s. Until that time, I enjoyed emotional and physical relationships with several women. I also had some interest in men sexually, which I pursued, partly out of curiosity and partly to avoid fathering children. Gay relationships then became my preference. I truly believe I had a choice in this matter. Much as I support gay rights, I take exception to a lot of gay groups that fervently insist all gays are born that way. For some, that may be true. For many others, my experience has taught me it is a chosen behavior. Regardless of why someone is gay, people who try to defend sexual orientation, insisting we have no choice, should stop. I am fascinated by this because if we look at the language, there is no indication here that it was a choice to be attracted to men. Let's be very clear. You can make a choice about whether or not to engage in romantic or sexual relationships with men, with women, with both, with neither. That is not the same thing as making a choice about who you find yourself attracted to. So when you say, I enjoyed emotional and physical relationships with women, I also had some interest in men sexually. You did not choose to have that interest. You chose to pursue or not pursue the relationships. And when I read this, Lewis, I'm reading the story of someone who is bisexual.
That's exactly what I got from this. I mean, the point is, when you are attracted to someone, it's not going to be your choice. And when they're attracted to you as well, no one should be telling you that you can't be happy together.
The other thing is that the letter doesn't say, for any number of reasons it may not say it, that you were only attracted to women and then became attracted to men, or vice versa, or that you're not still attracted to women, or whatever the case may be. It seems here that the choices you made were with regard to the gender of those who you wanted to be in relationships with, not a choice about attraction. And by the way, there really aren't straight men that I've ever met who would have sex with men rather than women simply to avoid fathering children. I mean, Lewis has even said he's not interested in a kid. If he accidentally had a kid, he would probably love the kid. But to avoid fathering children, Lewis is not saying, maybe I'll just have sex with men. In other words, he would have to have been born with an attraction to men. So, Lewis, I find this letter to be fascinating, but going only by the vocabulary and language used here, this letter is evidence of someone who is probably bisexual or maybe gay and simply made choices about who he wanted to pursue relationships with.
Right. In the case of this individual, I mean, you were attracted to both. So you literally did have the choice. So, well, which one do I want to go with? But a lot of people don't have that choice because they are attracted to one or the other.
Send me your thoughts on this letter. I know I will hear back from the individual who wrote me the letter, and I hope to hear from other people as well. Is my analysis off? Is there something in this letter which really suggests that this is an individual who chose to be gay as opposed to made a decision about the relationships he wanted to pursue? Am I way off on this? Am I right? Send me your thoughts. I'm very curious to hear from people, and I'm also very curious to find out how many new members we will have by the time we go on air tomorrow afternoon. Please go to davidpakman.com/membership, subscribe, support an alternative to corporate media. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Over the years, we've talked many times, Lewis, about the stimulative effect of food stamps, of infrastructure spending, and the lack of stimulus that's provided by things like tax cuts for the rich and corporate tax cuts. And there's a really great graphic out that actually basically ranks the stimulative effect, the multiplier effect of different types of government spending. And it shows, as predicted, as we have known for a really long time, that food stamps are 5 times more stimulative than a corporate tax cut. So when we look at the multiplier effect, what we're talking about is for every dollar spent by the government on a particular program or in a particular way, how many times does that dollar recycle through the economy in order to create more or possibly less than a dollar of stimulus? If you look at food stamps, let's think about a food stamp. Who gets food stamps? People who qualify for help based on their income, which means they really need that money, which means essentially all of the food stamp money is going to be spent. Further, food stamp money goes to a grocery store or some other food retailer. And then, of course, that retailer needs to buy from their suppliers food to keep up with the increased demand from food stamps. And the supplier needs presumably to buy more raw ingredients from farms. And you can see how there's a direct stimulus effect. Counter that, for example, with tax cuts for the rich. Tax cuts for the rich are not money that those people need. That's why they're the rich. So that it's not money that's going to be spent. In fact, typically the money is saved. And recently, the rich have been saving in record proportion. Doesn't have a stimulative effect. So when we look at this, food stamps are 5 times more stimulative than a corporate tax cut. They are around equally stimulative, around 5 times more stimulative than tax cuts for the rich. Almost as good as food stamp spending in terms of the effect on the economy is the extension of unemployment insurance benefits. Exact same logic. If you're out of a job and you qualify for unemployment, you probably need that money, meaning you'll spend most of it rather than saving it. This is all obvious. Economists and lay people all over the world understand this in majority. And for some reason here in the US, Lewis, we still have a huge portion of people and economists who claim that the reality is otherwise, who just don't seem to get it.
Right. I love how a lot of people think that this is just money that disappears. I mean, how often do we hear from the small businesses that receive food stamps that they don't want to take them anymore?
Very rarely. You hear that incredibly rarely. And again, remember, if people need to spend the money that the government is providing, that gives you stimulus. If people don't spend that money, you don't get economic stimulus. So just a basic logic test lets us very easily figure out what type of government spending benefits the economy. Media trust has recovered slightly from an all-time low. This is based on a recent Gallup poll, which says that the confidence of Americans in mass media has improved slightly after falling to an all-time low last year. 44% of respondents now say they have a great deal or fair amount of trust and confidence in the mass media. This was identical to 2011 and up from 40% in 2012, which was the lowest reading ever since this was since this test or this poll started back in 1997. Most of the bump, Lewis, comes from Republicans and independents who, by the way, also believe that the media are too liberal. Well, listen, I have a couple of thoughts on this. Number one, my trust in Gallup makes me question their assessment of Americans' trust in media based on what happened last election. I don't know if I'm the only one who's a little bit skeptical of Gallup numbers, but in the same way that many individuals are wrong thinking that the media is overwhelmingly liberal, while we've explored how the corporate media is overwhelmingly corporate, they're probably wrong about the news media being trustworthy as well, or not. Is there overwhelming skepticism, Lewis, about corporate media when maybe there should be more trust? I don't know.
Well, judging by everything we cover, there should be little to no trust in corporate media. And, polls, I mean, we talk about polls all the time. It seems that if there's only one poll on this, what can we really draw from that? But if we had a bunch of them, we might be able to make a better determination.
Yeah, and it is also more about tracking momentum, and 4 points is not that big of a swing. What I think we can say with comfort in knowing that it is more or less accurate is that trust in corporate media for different reasons among different people is not particularly high. We just now need that to translate into people understanding the importance of funding alternative media like this program. That's the next connection, Lewis, that needs to be made. Maybe Gallup is helping us make that point. I don't know. Let's go to your voicemail. Our voicemail number is open 24 hours a day. It is 219-2-DAVID-P. Call it any time. Here's a voicemail responding to the story about a Smith College student saying she wants to start an exclusively straight girl sorority. Listen to this.
Hi, David. This is Erin from Long Beach. I just want to say that the straight girl Smith College sorority, a lot of times in college, girls actually experiment kind of with their sexuality and whatnot. If a girl was to be straight, or to claim she was straight, try to join that sorority, and then kiss the girl, would she then negate it and get kicked out of the sorority? If that's the case, then I think that sorority is discriminatory. But if a girl just says, I'm straight, and then she's allowed to be with other girls in that sorority, but the whole purpose is she really wants to find a guy or a boyfriend or whatever, then I think if they allowed her to stay, then it's not discriminatory to try to actually have like-minded individuals together.
I have to tell you, I wasn't really thinking of the element of straight girls kissing other girls in college just to see what it's like. That was not first and foremost in my mind when thinking about whether it was discriminatory or not, Lewis.
But it's interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess if a girl wants to experiment but identifies as straight,
is she allowed or not? That is a good
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a listen to one more voicemail here.
Hey, David, this is Jordan. I'm calling from Vermont. I just finished listening to your segment on Ron Paul and homeschooling, and I was somewhat of a fan of him in 2012, only because he was the only Republican, basically, that would not touch religion. I think it's pretty amazing that he's convinced that public schooling and schooling in general, from what it sounds like, is indoctrinating kids into believing one thing and not having creativity. And if he had an ounce of logic, he would have known already that the Common Core standards were just implemented.
Yeah, but it's not about Common Core. You're actually wrong, Jordan. A lot of people mistakenly thought that Ron Paul did not have an ideological religious element to his campaign. But there's that ad with all those women saying they love having this pro-life gynecologist when he was their OBGYN obstetrician. And that it's just really great that he's against abortion for religious reasons and he's close to God. If you didn't realize Ron Paul had the religious element, you simply were not paying attention. Leave us your voicemail, 219-2-DAVID-P. Join us on the bonus show. Coming up next, davidpakman.com/membership. Excellent bonus show today. See you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.